Since Trump took office, when you string together those unbelievable actions of his, you'll find that beneath Trump's seemingly crazy behavior, there are actually hidden motives. Whether it's the attempt to annex Greenland, the aggressive move to seize the Panama Canal, or launching a tariff war against the whole world, all of these are his responses to an unprecedented crisis of collapse. If you don't believe it, let's uncover the mysterious veil of this great power game together. After Trump came to power, he has done a lot of things that left people scratching their heads. For example, he asked Musk to initiate a large-scale anti-corruption and staff reduction campaign in the United States, similar to establishing a new imperial inspection agency metaphorically. He repeatedly proposed the annexation of Greenland and the Panama Canal and recently provoked a global tariff war. Any one of these actions is astonishing. You know, these moves have pushed Trump right to the center of public attention and criticism. One false step and he could easily repeat the crisis that occurred last summer. Many people think Trump has gone crazy. To be honest, at first, I also couldn't figure out what he was really up to. But as time went by and various details emerged, I finally saw clearly the real game behind Trump's seemingly crazy actions. We all know that when the police handle a case, they pay special attention to the criminal motive. Once a case occurs, they first need to figure out the motive, then follow that clue to investigate the suspects, and finally find the truth. Trump's actions also have their own criminal motives. Previously, there were many speculations about the motives behind Trump's actions. Some said he did it for territorial expansion, some believed it was to bring the manufacturing industry back to the United States, and some even thought he just wanted to make money. These statements all have some merit, but none of them can completely connect all the cause and effect relationships. However, once you focus on two words, US Treasury bonds, many things suddenly become clear. Before Trump took office, in November 2024, Musk and some bigwigs in the US political arena repeatedly warned that if Congress didn't take immediate action, the US government would face a bankruptcy crisis. Why was that? At that time, the national debt of the United States had already reached a staggering $36 trillion, and the annual interest expenditure was approaching $1.5 trillion. If this trend continued, by April 2025, the interest the US had to pay would be even more exaggerated, reaching $1.7 trillion, which is almost more than twice the annual expenditure of the US military. So, after Trump's administration came into power, the top priority wasn't considering macro-level issues like the Sino-US game or the overall world situation. Instead, it was to solve the US debt crisis and prevent the collapse of the US dollar hegemony during his term. Otherwise, Trump would become a historical sinner in American history. Looking at it this way, solving the US Treasury bond crisis is Trump's criminal motive. Let's analyze one by one the things he has done. Why did Trump keep pressuring the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates before he took office? Because cutting interest rates can lower the yield of US Treasury bonds, allowing the Trump administration to pay less interest. For example, when the current interest rate is for 0.5%, Trump has to pay $1.7 trillion in interest. But if the Federal Reserve cuts the interest rate to 0.5%, the interest he needs to pay may only be a few $100 billion. The annual debt pressure would be reduced by half at once, leaving a large space for Trump's policy adjustments. So, pressuring the Federal Reserve became the first major thing Trump did. Unfortunately, the Federal Reserve simply ignored him. Why? Because the Federal Reserve is not a central bank controlled by the US government. It is a combination of interests controlled by private individuals. The real controllers behind it are the 7 major families and 12 private banks in the United States. The Federal Reserve Chairman is their elected spokesperson. So Jerome Powell doesn't have to listen to Trump at all. He only needs to be responsible to those behind-the-scenes tycoons. Since this path didn't work, Trump immediately implemented his second plan, asking Musk to carry out anti-corruption and staff reduction, and thoroughly investigating the expenditures of the US Department of the Treasury, the Department of Health, and the US military. Whether it's laying off 21,000 federal civil servants, cutting a deficit of $1 trillion, or terminating thousands of honorary contracts, the core purpose of all these operations is just one thing: to help the US government save money and relieve its financial pressure. Trump knew clearly that doing this would definitely make him enemies, but he still gritted his teeth and persevered. Why? Because the current US government is just like the Ming Dynasty in ancient China when its national treasury was empty. Without cutting expenses, it couldn't even sustain its operations. It can be said that Musk's reform is a life-saving measure for the US government. If this money couldn't be saved, Trump wouldn't be able to do anything. While doing this, Trump was also doing another seemingly crazy thing, repeatedly proposing to annex Greenland and the Panama Canal. Why did he want to do this? Was it really just for territorial expansion? Of course not. There are two key words here. One is rare earths, and the other is trade. Let's talk about rare earths first. The greatest value of Greenland lies in the discovery of an ultra-large rare earth deposit there. The currently proven reserves of rare earth oxides are as high as 280,020 tons, with heavy rare earths accounting for 27%. What are rare earths used for? They are essential materials for the US military industry. According to the data I found, each F-35 fighter jet requires 417 kilograms of rare earths, and each nuclear submarine requires 4 tons of rare earths. Without exaggeration, if the United States can't achieve independent supply of rare earths, it has no chance to start a war with us. But the embarrassing thing is that 90% of the global rare earth processing capacity is in China. So, Trump's intention is very clear. He doesn't care about the frozen land of Greenland. What he wants are the rare earth minerals there, trying to break China's monopoly in the rare earth field. Otherwise, by the time China and the United States really turn against each other, it will be too late to make arrangements. After talking about rare earths, let's look at Trump's calculations in the trade field. Why has he always insisted on taking control of the Panama region? Why was the transaction between Li Ka-shing and BlackRock set on April 2nd? And why did Trump start the tariff war on April 2nd? We couldn't understand these things before, but now we are gradually figuring them out. Taking control of Panama is actually a cover. The really crucial thing is that Li Ka-shing sold 43 ports around the world all at once at the same time. These ports are scattered all over the world. At the same time, the United States Federal Maritime Commission issued a document titled Special Review on Transit Restrictions on Key International Maritime Traffic Routes. The main content is to conduct a comprehensive review and control of the world's 7 major waterways, namely the Strait of Malacca, the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Gibraltar, the English Channel, the Strait of Singapore, and the Arctic route. At that time, we didn't understand what the United States was up to. But when the tariff war broke out, it suddenly became clear. It turned out that Trump wanted to strictly examine entrepot trade and block the way for Chinese goods to flow into the United States through other countries. Thinking about it this way, you can understand Trump's actions. That's why he imposed tariffs even on a country with only penguins. He was afraid that we would take advantage of loopholes and engage in entrepot trade. In other words, Trump's tariff war was not a spur-of-the-moment idea, but had been long planned since he took office. Annexing Greenland, taking control of Panama, and controlling the global rice market were all the groundwork he laid in advance. Finally, let's take a look at this magical thing, the tariff war. What is the real intention of Trump's launching the tariff war? Is it to completely decouple from us or to truly bring back the manufacturing industry? Neither. Trump himself made it very clear. Since the launch of the tariff war, he has publicly stated to the media many times that he has been waiting for a call from China. What is he waiting for? History has actually given us the answer. In 2008, the United States suffered a subprime mortgage crisis, and its financial economy was on the verge of collapse. Then, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson came to China in person to ask for help, hoping that we would buy US Treasury bonds to help the United States get through the crisis. At that time, our country's strength was not strong enough, and we had no choice but to reluctantly agree to the US request. We implemented a 4 trillion yuan monetary easing policy to offset the crisis of the US interest rate cut and help the US economy land smoothly. However, this also left us with the risk of a domestic bubble. Now, 17 years have passed, and the situation has changed. The US debt scale is much larger than it was in 2008, and it is almost unable to make ends meet. Another financial crisis seems to be on the horizon. The Americans want us to help them bear the debt again. But things are different now. We are stronger, and under normal circumstances, we will definitely not agree to their unreasonable request. Therefore, Trump came up with the idea of a tariff war. From Trump's perspective, our domestic demand is weak, and the economy is highly dependent on foreign trade revenue. He believed that once he threatened us with the decoupling of China and the United States, we would surely give in. And he didn't only threaten China. All the countries that have a trade surplus with the United States, such as the European Union, Japan, Vietnam, and so on, are within his threat range. Trump used the tariff war to put pressure on these countries, hoping to force them to continue buying US Treasury bonds and help the United States get through this crisis by borrowing new debts to pay off the old ones. Why did Trump give a 90-day buffer period to those countries that did not fight back? Because in June, $6 trillion of US Treasury bonds will mature. When the old debts mature, the question of who will buy the new bonds becomes a big problem. If no one buys them, the United States may face a liquidity crisis, and the US dollar hegemony may directly collapse. So Trump told all countries, "I will give you 3 months. If you don't buy US Treasury bonds in June, I will impose tariff sanctions on you in July." Seen in this way, Trump's tariff war is essentially a form of financial blackmail. It is the United States using its US dollar hegemony to force other countries to share its debt risks. But Trump didn't expect that 2 countries would openly oppose the United States 2 days ago. One is Japan, and the other is the United Kingdom, which has the same origin as the United States. As we all know, Japan has a tradition of opposition. The Pearl Harbor incident is an example. The United Kingdom has always been known as the barometer of European politics, and its decisions are often of great symbolic significance. Recently, when Trump was waging a tariff war, the British Trade Minister and the Chief of the Defence Staff spoke out again after a decade. This matter itself is of great significance. When Japan and the United Kingdom took the lead in selling US Treasury bonds, it directly led to a major collapse in the price of US Treasury bonds, causing a situation of a stock, bond, currency meltdown in the United States. Seeing this scene, Trump immediately softened his stance and publicly stated 2 days ago that he would exempt some electronic products from tariffs. However, today he started to be tough again, being inconsistent. What is Trump afraid of? He is worried that we will empty our US Treasury bonds at this time. We still have nearly $1 trillion of US debt in our hands. If we sell all the US Treasury bonds, it may directly trigger a US Treasury bond crisis. Trump is very afraid of this happening, so his attitude has obviously softened recently. Some people may question that the United States has a debt of $36 trillion and we have at most $1 trillion. Even if we sell all of them, how can it affect the overall situation? Friends who have traded stocks know that to move 10 trillion yuan of funds, you don't need 10 trillion yuan at all. As long as a major player takes the lead in selling 1 trillion yuan of stocks and the stock price starts to plummet, it will trigger a mass selling frenzy. This is why people like Soros can bring down a country's financial market with tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. Because once the sentiment of following suit selling is formed, the risk is huge. Therefore, if we empty our US Treasury bonds overnight, Japan, the European Union, other countries, and even some retail investors may follow suit and sell. By then, no one will want US Treasury bonds, and the US dollar hegemony may completely collapse. So Trump doesn't dare to take the risk and can only give in first to prevent the situation from getting worse. But he is not willing to admit that the tariff war has failed. Therefore, recently he has been vacillating between being tough and soft-spoken, like a madman. However, we need to be clear about one fact. No matter what Trump decides in the end, he cannot prevent the US dollar hegemony from moving towards a complete collapse. This tariff war, on the surface, seems that the United States is declaring war on the world with great arrogance, but in fact, it has overdrawn the United States' national credit. Trump's erratic tariff policies have made countries around the world feel a great threat. After this battle, countries around the world will surely accelerate the process of dollarization and establish a new trade system to replace the US dollar-based system. If such a thing really happens, Trump will become the gravedigger of the US dollar hegemony written in textbooks.